And Natalie Bennett, the leader of the Greens, is here, who's also standing in a seat in London, in Camden. Welcome to you. And this morning, we have the announcement of a higher rate of income tax, 60p tax rate. Would you accept that that will affect London and the South East disproportionately? Have you got any idea what percentage of the homes you'll affect will we hit here?
Well, I think, first of all, it's worth saying, setting out for those who mightn't have been watching earlier programmes, that what we're talking about is a 60p tax rate on earnings of over £150,000. That affects about 1% of people around the country. And that really is, it's a question of fairness. It's a question of the fact that we're calling for all organisations to see a ratio of 10 to 1 from the lowest paid to the top paid. You know, even the IMF and the World Bank are acknowledging that inequality are a real threat to our economic stability.
Any idea, though, just being straight so we can just, move on? Any idea how many? I mean, it might be 1% across the country, but how many in London?
I don't have a figure for London specifically, but
I don't know.
you know,
We're going to be looking at about 10% at least. More?
I think no. I don't think £150,000 salary. That's a very large salary.
And what do you not have any fears of the impact that this is likely to have when people have raised taxes to those levels in the past? It has been, the sense of it stifles wealth creation, innovation, doesn't it? It stifles people bothering to go that stage further in employing someone or expanding their company. Or
well, I think what you're suggesting there is an idea that people are solely motivated by money, and I think we all know that's not the truth. That's not the way the world works. If you're an entrepreneur and your company's doing well, of course you want it to do better. You want to be able to employ more people. You want to be able to sell more of your products. That's an entirely natural thing that people, people don't make mathematical calculations. They want to succeed in what they're doing, and that's true of whether we're talking about doctors or nurses or cleaners or anything else.
But you think you could raise £2 billion of this, and a lot of it presumably would again be raised in London by people in London, or wouldn't people just not create the wealth that then provided that taxation?
I think that's really an ideology and idea that really belongs in the era of Margaret Thatcher, and we've seen a lot of continuation of that Thatcherite ideology right through the Blair, the Brown, the coalition years. And I think people are seeing that we really do need to tackle the fairness in our society, the inequality in our society, the fact that in London so many people are struggling to keep food on the table, keep a roof over their head, whilst the wealth of society is being concentrated in that really.
But arguably, of course, let's consider the fact that some of your policies, which are increasingly now emerging, taking on the wealthier in society, could prevent just that wealth creation that then feeds into taxes, which then get redistributed and do help all of us, don't they, in London? I mean, we're accepting now there's going to be a wealth tax.
Well, we have proposed and are delighted
on what,
to
properties,
present
on people's cars, homes,
wealth, all wealth for people worth more than £3 million.
£3 million. Self-declaration, you said earlier. What does that? People would have to come voluntarily for. Do you think people are likely to do that?
Well, I think it's one of the things that we're seeing. A lot of wealth is held in financial products. A lot of wealth has been held in tax havens, and we have a new transparency around the world in terms of those tax havens.
Do you think many people will, or do you think you'll have to go after most people?
I think that we create the law, we enforce the law. This is a law that, a tax that needs to be brought in to rebalance our society. But I think
some of the stuff you talked about. Hang on a second, let's do something else, because I know you talked about.
I want to pick up on the wealth creation point and the point that was there in the tape.
Well, we're going to come on to that, but let me just establish first. Let me just establish first. Robin Hood tax as well, a new tax on financial.
Yep.
So then we've got the 60p rate of income tax. Limit the size of banks as well.
The Robin Hood tax, which of course is 11 other European countries have already agreed to introduce.
But I'm just wondering whether you think, because obviously you'll know the financial sector is so disproportionately important in London, but obviously some would argue to creating London's success, which then helps subsidise the rest of the country. And so in terms of tax receipts, have we got this right, the size of the city, the financial sector in London? Would you like to see it completely reduced?
Absolutely not. And of course we saw in 2007-8 the danger of the financial sector. And one of the big issues is that we haven't we're still talking about dealing with the too big to fail banks problem. We haven't dealt with the fragility of the financial sector.
But is it a right size? Would you like to see it reduced?
Very much so. What we want to see those resources, those human resources, those financial assets going into manufacturing, into food production, into a far more balanced economy, which would give us all much more financial security.
How long would that take? How long would that take? Because it's coming on to your wealth creation point. Well, how long do you envisage that kind of of transition would be when London has spent 20 years, 25 years establishing its kind of, preeminence in that in the global, financial sector?
Well, I think, and this comes to the other point of rebalancing London's economy as well as the rest of Britain's economy. And that's a geographical rebalancing as well. Too much money, people and resources has been focused on London, and that's not good for London, it's not good for the rest of the country. But also, just to take an example, there's a wonderful a cooperative in Enfield called Building Blocks, and it's a place where they have woodworking, metalworking, machinery. People who are starting up their small business can go and use that for 30 quid a morning or 60 quid a day. Use all those resources. You can get your small business going, your manufacturing business going without heavy overheads. And what we're seeing, and Jenny Jones, the Green London Assembly member, has done a lot of work on this. We're losing all of those facilities as we get the focus on housing development, etc.
And I can understand that vision and why that would be very attractive to a number of people. But to be absolutely clear, is economic growth in the capital, and London is leading the economic growth in the rest of the country in the fight back from recession, is it a bad thing?
Well, what we're seeing is, we've had a growth economy over the recent decades.
Would you be happy to see zero growth?
What we want to see is an economy that delivers a living wage for every worker. At the moment, 20% of workers are on less than a living wage.
Would you get that if you didn't have the growth?
People are struggling to get by. I mean, I've worked with the cleaners at the University of London who are on minimum wage in London, trying to survive in London on $6.50 an hour.
But then there'd be fewer cleaners, wouldn't they, if you imposed that thing, because the employers wouldn't be able to employ so many.
But what we need is a balanced economy that delivers wages that people can live on, not 0 hours contracts, stable employment, a varied economy, a more stable economy. The Bank for just one more point. The Bank for International Settlement said a couple of months ago, we are as close to a financial crash now as we were in 2007-8. We haven't solved the financial instability. We must deal with that.
Housing, 500,000 the plan over the next few years or whatever.
That's
20
around
billion now. Have we got a London figure now?
125,000 in London, as many as possible on brownfield sites, and these are social, genuinely affordable homes. Unfortunately, the term affordable has been much devalued in London. These are homes that people can actually afford to live in, which is what we so desperately need at the moment. And what we also want to do is put a cap on the rise in private rentals, so private tenants could have 5 years security of tenure, and with their rent each year not going up by more than CPI.
Where would the £6-7 billion, I think, if you're working out 20 billion nationally, £6 or £7 billion for social housing in London, where would it come from? It
would come from removing the mortgage rate relief on private landlords and also allowing councils to borrow to build homes.
Because councils borrowing a lot more. No cap on spending.
Well, this is, if you want an example of an extremely good reason for government to borrow, this is it. You borrow.
So you'd increase borrowing and the deficit and
you borrow to build homes. We also want to end right to buy, so you then have a permanent asset for the community, safe, secure homes for people to live in, and of course you get the return from the rentals, so you know how you're going to pay for that borrowing.
And a final point about that, the focus, people understand the emphasis on social housing. What about home ownership? Would you want new tenures to have, would they like people to be able to buy their own homes as well? Well,
one of the things that we're in a situation now, people can't afford to save for a deposit because rents are so high. So if we bring the whole thing back into balance, stop thinking about houses as financial assets, think of them as homes.
Natalie Bennett, thank you very much indeed. That's all we've got time for. You can see a full list